Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the CCWT webinar series. Today, I'm super excited to have Dr. Jason Perry from Howard University joining us, where we're going to talk about his dissertation research on internships at HBCUs, but also other things that he has going on. So thank you, Jason.
Thanks a lot. Glad to be here, Matthew. Like we were talking a little bit offline, I was happy to get the invite. So definitely glad to share and have this discussion.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I have lots of questions. And before I give a brief introduction to Dr. Perry, I just wanted to say a couple of words about this webinar series. So our center, the Center for Research on College to Workforce Transitions at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we had an internship research symposium going for a couple of years where we brought faculty, staff, students, people interested in internship research from around the country. And they came to Madison and we talked about it. You know, what's the cutting edge research on internships? What are some tips and strategies about how to best design and implement them? And it was going great. And then the pandemic hit, we canceled it and realized, well, actually, webinars are a great way to connect with scholars around the world who may not have been able to fly to Wisconsin or wanted to fly to Wisconsin. And so we started this series about a year ago, and I think it's turned out great because we've been able to connect with scholars in Australia and Germany and China and all over the US. And this is a continuation of this series. We've also expanded our webinar series, which you can see on the CCWT website, to include research on refugees and higher education, which is a research area that my colleague Matt Wolfgram is leading, and also a webinar series on community-based participatory action research. So if you're interested, check out our homepage and you can look at a whole great lineup of events. But today, I'm super excited to talk to Dr. Jason Perry. Jason holds the rank of Assistant Professor of Sport Management in the Department of Health, Human Performance, and Leisure Studies at Howard University. Dr. Perry received his Bachelor's of Science degree in Sport Management from Winston-Salem State University and his Doctor of Education in Ed Leadership and Management from Drexel. And it's the dissertation that he wrote while he was at Drexel that I came across when doing a literature review of internships within historically Black colleges and universities. Because some of our research here at UW-Madison focuses on internships in minority serving institutions, such as HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. When we were doing the lit review, I have to say, Jason, your dissertation was one of the most solid and intensive analyses of what an internship program looks like in an HBCU, but not just HBCUs, just in any university, but also the way that it delved into ways that the HBCU may represent a unique institutional culture and climate for students. It was really striking. It was one of the best pieces that we came across in our lit review. And I'm just really psyched that we're able to talk today about your work and the things that you're doing today.
Thank you, Matthew. Again, glad to be here. And it's definitely news, good to hear that you like the dissertation. You're locked away for, as you know, you're locked away working on it and, you know, again, trying to change the world with your dissertation. So it's always a pat on the back to hear that someone's reading it and they're happy about what they saw in there.
Oh, yes. And for any graduate students who are watching this right now or watching a recording, your dissertation will be read outside of the room of your committee. So take heart, keep it up. And so with that, Jason, I just wanted, you know, like I told you, this is a pretty informal conversation just about your work. But I'll start off by just asking what led you to be interested in this topic of internships and HBCUs, but also your focus on sports management.
Right. So I guess hopefully the story would not be too long, but I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was lucky enough to play, well, I guess I'll start here. I loved playing sports growing up, was a sports fanatic and just pretty much loved playing everything that I got my hands on. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to Winston-Salem State, which is a Division II historically Black college or university. So I was lucky enough to get that opportunity to play. But when I went for my undergraduate studies, I really didn't know what I wanted to major in. I just knew that I had a love for sports. And when I was going through the orientation, I met the department chair for the sport management department. And he just kind of said, "Hey, are you interested in sport management?" And I'm like, "What is that?" So he pretty much, explained the major as pretty much being the business side of sports. And it's all those individuals that are working hard behind the scenes to make those sports organizations and teams and clubs and just sport businesses or companies work. So I said, sure, I signed up for the major. But sport management is a newer field. It's probably in terms of academics, it's got it started around the 1960s or so. But one of the things that they're pushing in sport management degree programs since the inception is that you had to get the hands-on experience. So throughout my undergraduate studies, I was really getting a lot of experiences in terms of just learning the stuff or the theories inside the classroom, but also getting the connection to the outside world, so to speak. So with that being kind of at the forefront of the degree and my having a advisor that really pushed the internship experience, I went on to land an internship with the Carolina Hurricanes my senior year as a senior at Winston-Salem. Had a great experience there in my internship experience, but I decided to go to and pursue my graduate degree right after my undergraduate studies. So went off to High Point, as you mentioned in the bio, went off to High Point University, had a great couple of years there. But after I was done with my master's, I was looking to get and land that job. So I was applying everywhere to these different jobs in sports, for teams. I had worked in community relations as an intern, as I mentioned, for the Hurricanes. I had worked in minor league baseball for their facility management team. Just again, trying to get little jobs to kind of get my career started. So when I was applying after my master's degree, I was looking and really just went on some interviews, couldn't land a job. And my father, who was in education for pretty much his entire career, said, "Hey, why don't you apply for this teaching job at St. Augustine's University," which was a small HBCU in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I happened to have very little teaching experience. The only teaching experience that I had was teaching at a Boys and Girls Club, like a life skills program, where we helped high school students through sports programs, but we also taught them life skills. So I had very minimal experience in terms of teaching and education. But I applied, was lucky enough to get the interview at St. Augustine's University. At that time, it was actually St. Augustine's College, but currently they are St. Augustine's University. So when I'm on campus, walking around for my tour of the campus and just for the interview in general, I bump into Coach George Williams, which was the athletic director at St. Augustine's University. He had worked there for many years. He's one of the most, he's a legendary coach in track and field. He has something like 39 national championships as a track and field coach. And he happened to work with my father when he was at St. Augustine's University. So he happened to just, again, when I'm walking on campus, we bump into Coach Williams. And he's like, "Oh, that's Perry's son," which, my dad being Ernest Perry, the connection was there. And he's like, "You should hire him." So I don't know if that was the reason why I got the job and my foot in the door at that university at that time, but it definitely didn't hurt me to have that co-signed by Coach Williams to come on the staff. So they put me in charge of the sport management program. At that time, it probably had maybe 20, not even 20 students who were enrolled in sport management. and they put me as a program director at that time. We weren't even a department, and I was put in charge of growing the program. And one of the ways that I kind of referred to it to grow the program was through the internship program. So that was used to recruit students to sell what we were, one of the things that we're doing. We really tried to push students getting into their career and getting their foot in the door through that practical experience. So the internship program that I experienced as a student, I was also, again, now experiencing it as a program director at St. Augustine's. So some years passed, the program actually grew, thanks to probably myself, but also, of course, the great people that I was working with, my staff and faculty and department chairs who helped. But then after that, I said, hey, let's look at this dissertation and pursue a doctoral degree. And again, being the chair of the department at that time in sport management, and knowing what the internship program it did for me, and it always being instilled that it was a way to get your foot in the door, I said, hey, let me look in terms of research and what's out there in this area. Didn't find a lot of research on HBCUs, HBCU internship programs. However, I did find a lot of research on HBCUs by themselves and also sport management by itself as well. But that combination of HBCU sport management internship program, the research, as you mentioned, was minimal at that time. So I wanted to do my case study to kind of lay the groundwork, and here we are. That's kind of sorry for the kind of long story here. Hopefully, it kind of got to the point, but that was kind of my start introduction into internships at HBCUs that focused in on the area of sport management.
Great, and no apology necessary. That was a great overview of your history and career trajectory. As usual with these webinars, you mentioned a few topics that completely destroyed my nice list of questions, because now I have all these follow-up questions about what you're just saying, but I'm going to stick to at least some of my questions. But later on, I want to ask about this issue of social networks and social capital. I mean, you bumping into somebody on campus. It's one of the main areas of our research right now, is just how internships enhance social capital and networks, which then can get students jobs, but also how social networks actually help students find the internship. So that's something I'm going to want to follow up on. But can you first tell me a little bit about the HBCU environment? When you were doing your dissertation work, but also I didn't realize you were a practitioner scholar. As you were in the environment, can you speak a little bit about the HBCU as a unique institutional culture or location for thinking about internships?
Yeah, and if we, well, yeah, definitely sure can. And I know if you want to stick with kind of jump off format, that's fine as well. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, in terms of the environment, I think it starts with the mission of HBCUs. HBCUs got its start around actually before the Civil War, where it was actually given the mission of educating freed slaves, African Americans at that time. Of course, people who faced racism and discrimination, but also just giving them a way to better their lives and to get them these careers or these jobs. A lot of the institutions were teaching kind of the fundamentals at that time. Also, a lot of the institutions to start HBCUs focused in on teaching as well. So I think today there's still that mission of serving those who have been underserved and at times are minimal or marginalized in terms of how they're represented. So you come to an HBCU and you have this environment, which is, I would say the best way probably to describe it is family oriented, where you kind of know everyone. You have these great opportunities to socialize, but also be educated by those who often look like you and have this commonality with you as well. but you can walk on campus into the cafeteria, know the staff in the cafeteria. You could walk over to the registrar's office or admissions, and you know those individuals as well. So it's again, more of a family-oriented feeling in the environment where there is a lot of connection there. And I think that also moves into the internship experience as well, where you're able to still have that environment where you are being helped. But at the same time, the mission is to, again, get you a good career and get you to be a better version of what you were when you entered into the institution.
Right. And I'll just note now for the attendees of this webinar, if you have any questions for Dr. Perry, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can share them. And also it's always great to hear where you're from. So if you can put in the chat where you're calling in from or signing in from, that's always nice to hear. Jason, quick follow-up question on the point you just made about the family atmosphere of HBCUs. I'm just curious if you notice a difference being at a large university like Howard relative to one of the smaller ones. It sounds like you had experience in pretty small institutions before.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that would be true in terms of the environment. I think you still have at the larger HBCUs, the ones that are probably more well-known, you do have that still family atmosphere, but it's definitely on a larger scale. So it still is family-oriented at the larger institutions. When I'm comparing kind of my previous experience at some of the smaller HBCUs, you definitely have that connection, homecoming, which is definitely something that's annually, and that is an annual event at HBCUs. It's definitely something that is like a family reunion. And it's definitely something that brings in people. And you're very engaged on HBCU campuses as well. So definitely I would probably say that there is a little difference in terms of the family nature of the environment at a smaller HBCU compared to a larger one. But there's definitely still that feeling that you could still feel a part, and you feel like you're connected to your instructors or your professors, again, to maybe, those who are running different programs, the fraternities, the sororities as well, but just different organizations as well. So it's definitely a unique feeling, but in terms of specifically to answer your question, I would say there is there's some similarities, but also if we're looking at some of the larger institutions as well that are HBCUs, those connections or networks, I would say, are also increased. So for example, Howard, which is kind of one of the well-known HBCUs, it definitely has a connections. It has the donors and those who support the institution. It has the financial backing, but compared to some of the smaller HBCUs, it maybe don't have the same name recognition. It can be a little challenging for those institutions, but in terms of just impact, I think the larger HBCUs do have a larger reach and a larger network, and some larger in terms of the financial impact, they're less challenged compared to some of the smaller HBCUs.
Right. And I think Howard has a fan in the White House right now too, right?
Yes. Howard, actually they're doing, and I have one of my students who's actually part of a HBCU initiative in the White House, who's actually serving on that committee. So kind of that connection in terms of just, being in the state's capital, being at a well-known institution, they have a farther reach, it feels like, in terms of networks, and which is a good thing. But it's definitely something to say that the impact is great. I'm glad to see changes, and I'm glad to see that initiatives are being made in the White House as well, definitely.
Great. And well, we have some attendees, Dana from Austin, Texas, where I think it's probably a little warmer here than Wisconsin.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask a follow-up question, Jason, about this family atmosphere within HBCUs. I'm curious about the way that the commitment of HBCUs to Black excellence and to Black students plays a role in this creating of a family atmosphere, especially how it may impact internships. And I'm asking in part because, you know, this was one of the key findings of your dissertation, if I understood correctly. One of the themes in your dissertation was that the learning environment at the HBCU, you know, where many faculty and internship coordinators were very committed, you know, to nurturing students, mentoring students, you know, making sure that they succeeded, and maybe in ways that you would not see in other programs or other institutions. There's a really well-known paper in the NASPA journal, the Student Affairs Journal, about this idea of other mothering that happens in HBCUs, where student affairs professionals take on almost a parenting role in nurturing students and making sure that they succeed. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about, you know, how you see that intersecting with a commitment to Black students and Black excellence. And I'm asking that partly as a white person who did not go to a HBCU. And, you know, in the world of internships, this issue, again, is not something that really comes up very often. Like I mentioned to you in our early emails and in our literature review, race and racial identity in research on internships is most frequently treated as a variable in statistical models. It's not really addressed in an in-depth way based on our review in the way that we're talking about now. And so based on what I was saying, which is kind of a rambling question, do you have any thoughts on any of those issues?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, in terms of the, as you mentioned, kind of that nurturing kind of feel of HBCUs, and where does that, how does that kind of move into the internship experience? I definitely say it's at the forefront. I know, I'm assuming we'll probably get into some of my findings and what I found to kind of stand out in terms of the environment, but just the connection with the learning environment was one of my major findings in my study, where there was this nurturing feel by the program director. So the program director wore several hats at the institution that I hosted or that I used for my setting for my study. She was the intramurals program or director of the intramurals program. She was an instructor in the recreational management department, and she was teaching a full load of classes. And she was also, again, the program director for the internship program for sport and recreation management students. So she was on campus and very interactive and engaged with those students, and pretty much gave them 24/7 access. And with my study, I did a case study, and so I don't know if this transfers over to other HBCUs. I mean, I'm sure we'll probably look at future research and directions for this study, which is something I would like to look at, maybe comparing some HBCUs and also comparing some PWIs with HBCUs, sport management internship programs. But in this setting, the director was really just hands-on. She gave them access to her. She also incorporated an internship talk as it was kind of discussed or categorized as, where the students would do their internship and they would be working pretty much a 12 credit internship experience for that semester, but they also had to come back on campus and they had to still engage in these internship talks, where she gave them support in terms of problems that they were facing in their internship, hearing from the students, having them, giving them the capability to speak with each other, and just kind of have that those extra levels of or layers of support, which I thought and what the research found was critical in terms of just having those students fully engaged. And again, strengthening the learning environment in terms of just the nurturing feel of the overall environment.
Yeah, and one of the things that I heard at a couple of our HBCU partners is the focus on internships and experiential learning, which is relatively recent, really built upon a prior commitment to service learning and community engagement, which I've heard in the past is also built upon a commitment to the Black community within the region where the institution is. Have you found either in your research or your practice that like an institutional commitment to service learning or community engagement plays a role in how internships are designed?
Yeah, definitely in terms of the service learning aspect, I definitely have seen it when as I worked with St. Augustine's University, I definitely saw it in terms of what the mission was for the university. Students had to volunteer, and service learning was something that you always had a service learning project on campus that students were engaged in and involved in. So as you mentioned, I definitely have witnessed that in terms from a practical experience as a professor, but definitely in terms of the connection to the internships as well. You definitely see this aspect of improving your community. And in addition, I think today, in terms of what we see in the professional sports leagues, in terms of the commitment to social justice and what we're just seeing in terms of just, politically and socially and putting all those areas together, we definitely have seen that kind of pushed on us, right? As a society, there's no really running from it. So in addition to that push on a national level and pretty much in all walks of our life, I think there's also that connection with a lot of students who are minorities are seeing that they feel empowered to really serve their communities and be involved and be engaged. So in addition to the mission encompassing kind of the service aspect in terms of their vision or their mission, I think it's the students themselves who see the need to get involved and be engaged. And they're looking for that from their instructors, and they're seeking those opportunities themselves as well. So that's also, I would say, another way that I've seen the connection in terms of from a practical sense. In terms of the aspect of seeing the service with the internship program in terms of how it's being formed, I would say that is that connection is partially there. Ultimately, a lot of sport management internship programs follow the criteria that other programs are using. And also COSMA, which is the Commission on Sport Management, the Commission on Sport Management Accreditation, they push their service learning, and they push actually internship or learning experience on in terms of their accreditation process. So I think that a lot of HBCU internship programs also follow up with including that as well, which is pushed by the accrediting body. So I would also say just generally in terms of how they're created and how the programs are ran, I think a lot of it follows what other peer institutions are doing, and just all institutions that are follow or under the umbrella of COSMA as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, with this question of how internships may look different at a HBCU relative to a predominantly white institution, for example, one of the things I think is important to consider is professions and disciplines like yours, or social work or counseling psychology, ones that have, accrediting bodies that really, they have regulations for how these internships need to look, in contrast to disciplines where it's kind of, create your own. Also wanted to mention again to the attendees, if you have any questions for Jason, please put it in the chat. There is one from Brian from Illinois, but before I ask that, I kind of have a preparatory question. And this is about some findings that we've heard from students in HBCUs where they go to white-owned businesses or white-owned employers, and they're experiencing discrimination in the workplace. Specifically, I've heard from students, because we do focus groups, talking about if there's also a white intern, that they're treated really differently by the employer. And there's often a stigma attached to not just their Black identity, but the fact that they attend an HBCU. I'm curious if you've experienced that or seen it with students in your program, and if you have any thoughts on how that can be addressed. I noticed in your dissertation, you mentioned that some of the internship coordinators really worked to, they understood that the stigma existed about HBCUs, and they tried to address that. But can you speak a little bit more about that topic?
Sure. Yeah, certainly in terms of my study, it wasn't a major issue. One of the reasons why it wasn't a study or wasn't an issue in my study was the HBCU network in terms of the location for a lot of or pretty much all of the participants in the study. They interned with spaces that were inclusive. The majority of those locations were led by African Americans or racial minority individuals. So they were actually interning with individuals who, again, were racial minorities. And again, you're probably inclusive, and there's little issues in terms of discrimination or lesser issues of discrimination where you're experiencing an internship that's within the network of HBCUs, again, being an HBCU student. Overall, I definitely, to look at it from a larger scale, definitely I would say when you're branching out to different organizations in terms of that internship experience, you can definitely face discrimination. And when you're in those spaces that are probably new to you, can be challenging. For a lot of HBCU students, you are probably from, and not all, but a portion or a large portion come from a environment that may have been, before they entered their college experience, it was probably more, one that was more, had racial minorities in it. And now they're at HBCU where there's a lot of racial minorities there as well. And that first experience that they have at a large internship experience can be one that is is an eye opener in terms of that experience. So it may be under the supervision of maybe a white instructor, and that can be something that is new for that student. And typically, maybe they're in that setting for the first time. There can be some challenges. So there's definitely some issues in terms of getting acclimated to the internship experience for students from HBCUs. I like to put the responsibility in the hand of the employer in terms of making that intern comfortable, in terms of the environment, in terms of the HBCU environment. And as an instructor, the instructors a lot of times are supporting students. They know that they are getting or entering in a lot of spaces that are maybe new and they may face discrimination. So I think the instructors know about that. And they, again, with that same nurturing aspect of the HBCU, they're already telling the interns or telling students that there can potentially be some challenges. And also, in addition to those challenges, that the industry, in terms of sport management, their individuals in leadership and management, the positions held by minorities is lesser in terms of leadership positions. So in terms of that, I think the internship program directors are already giving that information to the intern, and they're going into it with the thought that they have to work harder and they have to be able to compete in an industry that really doesn't favor them in terms of the numbers and hiring. So that's another challenge that they are facing. But in terms of the support, in terms of dealing with it from a personal experience. And I mentioned my first internship was with the Carolina Hurricanes as an undergraduate senior or undergraduate student. My senior internship was phenomenal with the Hurricanes, in part due to I had a woman director or supervisor on campus, a white woman, but I also had, and she was very supportive. And I think just giving me the opportunity, coming from HBCU, I already had the respect, and it was, being with a professional sport, that was also something that I felt good about in terms of the site and the location. So I went in it with open eyes in terms of really thinking that I would be included, but they also showed that when I was there on doing my internship for that semester as well. So thinking back to my original experience as an undergraduate student, I saw this support and I had it, and the organization really bent over backwards, so to speak, to really help me to feel included. And then my last point to probably add to that as well, there was leaders, another program or a department leader or director that was also for the Hurricanes at that time, who was also an African-American woman who was very supportive. And so I saw leadership in the organization that was African-Americans or minorities. Then I also saw my leadership that were women in the organization as well. So coming into that experience, I felt good about it. And as I went through my internship, I definitely didn't feel any discrimination. But I'm sure, and I know those experiences happen where if you're experiencing you have an employer who's white, and this is a new experience, and you're not feeling included, and you're feeling that the different opportunities are given to other groups of individuals over you, and they're still an intern like you are, I definitely know that you can feel marginalized in those internship experiences as well.
Great, thank you, Jason. And I'm glad we're recording this, because to unpack everything that you just said will take me a little while. But your observation on the responsibility of employers, I think, is important. And we've been thinking a lot about the role of HR training, and I know there's a lot of conversations now about implicit bias training and how interviewing is done, and internal advancement in companies and things like that. But internships, as you know, are important because that's often the foot in the door for a student. And one thing that we found, and I'm going to get to Brian's question now, is that some of the students that we're hearing from, they're kind of facing two layers of what they feel is two layers of discrimination. One is their racial identity, but the other is the HBCU. And his question is, some of the data show that students felt that schools' perceived reputation hindered their getting an internship. How do we convince organizations that HBCUs and HSIs are rigorous and have great students that can add value to their organization?
Wow, great question there. It's definitely a challenge. Wow, great question. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. We definitely have seen, in terms of, at least for my study, I know a lot of the students felt good about the experience. But again, they were pretty much limited to that network of the HBCU. So it was difficult to branch out. I would say we have to, at least again, in my study, but in terms of just answering that question as a whole, is definitely something that we're seeing where it has to really, again, come from just kind of giving them opportunities, which once you have the opportunity, and we're not asking the students who are interns, and I've seen it throughout my career, they're not asking for just a free internship where they're not qualified and they're in over their heads. They want to be challenged, but they feel like they feel like they are ready and able to really do well and really break into these organizations. So I think it starts with just the opportunity. And again, if we're looking at just hiring practices, and just kind of human nature, you hire individuals a lot of times who kind of think like you, who maybe act like you. So in terms of that, if we're having all individuals who are just from one background doing all the hiring, then we're limiting ourselves in terms of those individuals who will be hiring. But in terms of just kind of how we're going to break down that stigma of just HBCUs, I just think it continues to grow with opportunities and just more awareness for lesser or minority driven institutions. Where more individuals are getting the opportunities, we're showing that they can actually do well and they can flourish as leaders. And I just think it just takes time and just opportunity for that stigma to hopefully to lessen or minimize as well.
Great, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Brian, for your question. And if anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. And now I'd like to open it up, Jason. Is there anything from your dissertation or your experiences in the world of internships, which is rather extensive? Is there anything you'd like to highlight or talk about right now?
Sure. In terms of just my study, I would definitely say one thing I would like to highlight is the student perception piece. Students actually, in my study, and this was a smaller case study where I really wanted to explore the environment. So I did a series of interviews of the program director. I did a series of interviews of those students who were enrolled in the internship program, and also observations and the document analysis as well. So I really wanted to just kind of describe the environment. And I found that a lot of the student perception was that they had some challenges and some issues in the internship experience. For example, one player who was actually a member of the men's basketball team was also had some coaching aspirations to be a head coach once he left or once he completed his degree. So he interned for the women's basketball team. So while he's playing his games for the men's team, he would also pull pretty much double duty to go and intern and be assistant coach for the women's team. So he had a tough go of it in terms of just kind of trying to manage that and finish up his coursework. And those supervisors and a program director were very helpful. And he showed the initiative to make it through. And he's now doing very well. He's coaching currently, and we saw the result on the individual level, how he went through the rigors of being challenged as an intern, and now he's working in that same aspiration that he had. So that was one positive. But also in terms of just other examples, there's a lot of difficulties in terms of some hardships. Another student actually had an issue where he was actually working on campus in the athletic department, where he was right under the head athletic director, but the athletic director got sick. And being a small HBCU, the staff was also a small staff. So when the director went away and was out when they were sick, that intern really didn't have a lot of guidance or direction in terms of responsibilities, and he felt like he was given kind of just busy work as well. So he had a rough go of it. So we have these little scenarios where you're working or you're experiencing these organizations, and you're experiencing the HBCU network in terms of how you're interning in that network. But you're also, again, pursuing those jobs and those aspirations that you have in your career, which is great. But also at times they did feel a little, face some hardships. And it wasn't things that weren't things or items that they weren't able to overcome, but it was items that they did have. Just felt like it was a rough go of it throughout their internship experience. But in addition, and just kind of my main takeaway there in terms of their perception, all of the participants felt like they were ready to pursue careers once they left or once they completed the internship program. So they felt like they were prepared. Although they had the the ups and the downs throughout the experience, they felt like they were able to go and pursue a graduate degree or work or jump right into their career and work a job with a sport organization. So that was something in terms of the perception that I thought was a major finding in terms of them still having issues and challenges and working in this unique environment, but still feeling like they're able to compete with other individuals who are seeking those same jobs. And they thought they were ready to have great careers after enduring the internship experience.
So it sounds like part of your finding was that the students, even though they were experiencing some of these hardships, they recognized the potential value of the internship for their futures. And so they persisted through it.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that's one thing we hear a lot too. And kind of a flip side of that is for students in programs where they don't see the potential benefit of the internship, whether it's their faculty or their advisors haven't talked about it, or they don't know what they want to do when they're graduate, that becomes kind of problematic because when hardships sometimes occur for them, they may drop it or just decide not to pursue the internship at all just because they don't see the value of it.
Definitely. And even for those programs that require the internship aspect for graduation, I think a lot of it at HBCUs, at least from my experience and my research, is that the push is early on in terms of really having a goal with your reason for taking the internship. You just don't want to just take one just to get the course credit. It's actually from an early stage, and before you even enter into the course, you're being told by a program director or you're hearing from an instructor in the department that this is something that you just can't take lightly. This is something that could really push you into that next step in terms of your life or your career. So I think you get that from an early stage at a lot of HBCUs. Again, not to say that this is something that we don't see at other institutions, but just that connection in terms of really having the connection with students to really push that early is something that I have found to be something that's always happening that happens often at HBCUs.
Right, and you hit on one of the primary research questions in our center with respect to this study is, what is it, if anything, about an HBCU or Hispanic serving institution or any institution really, where it seems like the culture of the entire campus, or at least entire programs, is really pushing students to not just take an internship, but they provide them with the support systems necessary to succeed. Because again, in some cases, some campuses, as you say, don't push these and they don't provide the support systems. So I think we're getting close to the end. Brian just posted a great piece. It's about a player from Rutgers doing an internship with IBM during the NCAA tournament. And on that topic, Jason, I have to ask, what sport are the Hurricanes in?
Hurricanes, sorry, I didn't mention that. They're a hockey team. They're in the NHL.
I was thinking hockey, but I didn't want to assume. Okay.
Right, yeah, sorry, I should have said that. I know I kept on mentioning Hurricanes. Yeah, for those who may not be a follower of hockey or sports in general, they're a member of the NHL.
Okay. And I just wanted to wrap up with any, you mentioned earlier some future research that you think either needs to be done or that you want to do. You mentioned comparative studies. Is there anything else you can say about that? What do you think people like us should be studying next, and what do you want to study next?
Yeah, in terms of, I think the big picture with internships, as I mentioned, I think there's definitely a lot to be explore with HBCU internship programs, specifically in my area, sport management. I definitely see the need to really do kind of, as you mentioned, some comparative studies to see if we could really explore this unique aspect. I think hopefully my kind of goal was to kind of, especially when I saw the findings and when I was collecting the data, I thought like I was really adding to the information in terms of exploring or asking the question, is this unique to HBCUs, or is this just something that we can show some, that would show at all internship programs? I would like to really explore that question of, is it unique? So I think my case study kind of lays or sets kind of or it gives a nice little start to the question and kind of exploring it in terms of just that one environment. But in terms of future research, I definitely would say that we have to, and I would like to be a part of that as well, to kind of further that discussion in terms of comparative research amongst HBCUs or other minority serving institutions, to really find out if this is something that is a unique aspect, or is that something that is a benefit, or is it something that potentially are the challenges. As I mentioned, with some of the challenges that the students faced, although they felt like they could overcome it, are those challenges unique to their story or to the stories of HBCUs? So I definitely like to explore that and look into that future further. In terms of my other current research, I'm looking at social justice. I recently have a manuscript on looking at sport management classrooms and how to have difficult conversations on social justice. As we discussed, and as I mentioned, there's definitely a new push towards kind of being fed up with some of the lack of social justice for some leagues or sport organizations. And we're seeing that from, politically to socially, that there is this push to, again, ensure equality or equity for all individuals. So with that being still coming to the forefront in sport management, my paper is looking at how can instructors have that conversation with students, and how can instructors prepare those students for those jobs with organizations that may be having social justice initiatives, or are faced with other challenges in terms of issues like Colin Kaepernick that happened some years back, where he kneeled during the national anthem, and we for the most part kind of know how that went in terms of some of the backlash that he received. So in terms of just preparing the future students, I think there's always that push in terms of with sport management. I think my interest is to really explore how students can be prepared, whether it's how to interact in those organizations, how they can be prepared when they enter into other organizations beyond their college degree. So I think in terms of research, that's kind of my focus of where I'm looking. But as a whole, I definitely think that is definitely an area that needs to be explored as well.
Wow, that's great. And one of the things that really struck me by what you were just saying, Jason, other than I want to read your paper when it comes out, please share it, is that you just described a scenario where you're talking to students about the racial dynamics of the workplaces that they're likely to go into. And this is just a speculation, but I suspect that in some internship programs around the country and in different disciplines, that's not part of the conversation. What kind of racial dynamics can you expect in an accounting firm or in a hospital or in other types of workplaces? Maybe it is. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised in our current field work, but that strikes me as a really important thing to be thinking about and including.
Yeah, definitely. Again, just if you're not faced with those individuals, and if it's not something that's kind of in the forefront of your kind of your mindset or what you're looking to push, then it may not be something that really is discussed in those classrooms. So as you mentioned, I think it's key to push that narrative and push that conversation for all institutions, because this is just something that we have to be prepared with, because we want to feel included. Everyone wants to feel included in this in society, right? And you also want to be included in your daily jobs and routines as well. So just to have those conversations, I think is something that will lead to more people being aware. And also, I guess that would also include that initial or that earlier question of how to kind of break that stigma as well, which I think Brian asked a question earlier in terms of the stigma. I think just those conversations at predominantly white institutions, as well as minority serving higher education institutions as well, having those conversations in the classroom, I think is key.
Right, I agree. And unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I just want to thank you again, Dr. Perry, for taking the time to speak with me and us. The recording of this webinar will be up on our center's website in a couple of days. So if any of you, the attendees, think that your colleagues would enjoy it or appreciate it, you can check that out. But thank you again, Dr. Perry. I'm really glad that we came across your dissertation. One of the cool things about internship research I like is that it's so interdisciplinary, and I don't think I would have met you at one of my learning science or anthropology or higher education conferences. And so I'm really glad we encountered your work, and yeah, thanks again for doing what you're doing and taking the time with us today.
Well, again, Matthew, I appreciate it. It was a pleasure to have this conversation, and I'm glad we crossed paths and looking forward to connecting and furthering that conversation.
All right. Thank you for joining us, everyone, out in webinar land, and have a great Friday and a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.